My name is Ray Mountainhall. I am 43 years old, and I work as a commercial truck driver specializing in mountain freight routes through Montana's most treacherous highway passes, where I've learned that some mechanical failures aren't caused by normal equipment problems, but by supernatural forces that target isolated truckers on remote mountain roads. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from, please. I've been driving commercial trucks for 18 years through Montana's challenging mountain terrain, hauling freight across passes that climb to 6,000 feet elevation with grades steep enough to destroy brakes and weather conditions that can turn deadly within minutes. This happened last February while hauling a load of construction equipment from Billings to Missoula via Highway 200. A route that crosses the Continental Divide through some of Montana's most isolated mountain territory, where cell service doesn't exist, and help can be hours away. The highway passes through wilderness areas where mechanical failure means potential death during winter conditions, requiring truckers to maintain their equipment perfectly and carry extensive emergency supplies for survival situations. Around 2 p.m., while climbing toward McDonald Pass at 6,300 feet elevation, my diesel engine began experiencing power loss that didn't correspond to any mechanical problem I recognized after 18 years of mountain truck driving experience. The engine was running smoothly, but producing insufficient power to maintain highway speeds on the steep grade, forcing me to downshift repeatedly, despite recent maintenance and perfect mechanical condition verified during my pre-trip inspection. Around 3 p.m., the power loss escalated to complete engine failure with all systems shutting down simultaneously in patterns that defied normal mechanical failure modes and left me stranded on a remote mountain highway during dangerous winter conditions. My truck's electrical systems failed in sequence: headlights, radio, heating system, and engine controls, creating total power loss that made emergency communication impossible while trapping me in sub-zero temperatures at high elevation. The systematic equipment failure occurred in an area where no other traffic was visible, and where emergency services would require hours to reach my location, creating a survival situation that tested every aspect of winter mountain driving preparedness. Around 4 p.m., while attempting emergency repairs using tools and spare parts carried for mechanical breakdowns, I discovered evidence that my truck's failure wasn't caused by normal mechanical problems, but by deliberate sabotage using methods that exceeded human capabilities. Engine components had been damaged in ways that required access to internal systems without opening the hood or engine compartments, suggesting supernatural interference with mechanical systems that should have been impossible to reach. The electrical system showed burn patterns that indicated power surges far exceeding normal voltage levels, but with no external power source that could have caused the electrical damage I was observing throughout my truck's systems. Around 5 p.m., as daylight faded and temperatures dropped toward life-threatening levels, I began experiencing phenomena that confirmed my truck failure was caused by entities that specifically targeted isolated mountain truckers during vulnerable situations. Strange sounds began coming from areas around my disabled truck, mechanical noises that mimicked engine operation and equipment sounds, but that came from the surrounding wilderness rather than from any mechanical sources. The sounds seemed designed to confuse and disorient stranded truckers by creating acoustic illusions that suggested help or other traffic in areas where no assistance was actually available during emergency situations. Around 6 p.m., entities began demonstrating direct interference with my emergency survival efforts by manipulating equipment and supplies in ways that increased danger and reduced my chances of surviving the night at high elevation. My emergency heating equipment malfunctioned. Despite recent testing, my communication devices failed to operate even with backup power supplies, and my survival gear showed damage that hadn't existed during my pre-trip equipment check. The systematic sabotage of emergency equipment created escalating survival challenges that suggested the entities understood exactly what truckers needed to survive mountain winter conditions and were deliberately eliminating those resources. Around 7 p.m., the supernatural interference escalated when entities began physically manipulating my truck to increase psychological pressure and create additional mechanical problems that complicated emergency survival procedures. The disabled truck began rocking and shaking despite no wind conditions. Engine compartments opened and closed without manual operation, and truck systems activated randomly in ways that drained backup power supplies needed for emergency heating. Most disturbing was that the entities seemed to understand commercial truck operations well enough to use mechanical systems as psychological weapons against stranded drivers during life-threatening emergency situations. Around 9 p.m., using emergency procedures learned during 18 years of mountain driving, I managed to establish limited radio contact with Montana Highway Patrol and coordinate emergency assistance, despite continued supernatural interference. During the 4-hour wait for emergency services, entities continued their harassment campaign, but seemed to lose interest as rescue became more likely, suggesting they preferred victims who faced hopeless survival situations rather than truckers who might be successfully rescued. The tow truck operator, who eventually reached my location, reported similar mechanical failure incidents on remote Montana highways, with patterns of simultaneous system failures that exceeded normal breakdown statistics and suggested coordinated supernatural activity. Investigation of my truck revealed mechanical damage that required complete engine replacement and electrical system rebuilding, but with failure patterns that couldn't be explained through normal wear or environmental factors affecting mountain trucking operations. I continue driving Montana mountain routes because freight delivery is essential to rural communities and because mountain trucking provides good income for experienced drivers, but I now carry enhanced emergency equipment and avoid certain highway sections where supernatural truck failures have been documented. Some entities in Montana's mountain wilderness have learned to exploit commercial truck vulnerabilities to create life-threatening situations for isolated drivers, and they demonstrate mechanical knowledge that makes mountain trucking far more dangerous than normal equipment failures and weather hazards would suggest. My name is Buck Timberwolf. I am 38 years old, and I work as a logging equipment operator for Rocky Mountain Timber, managing heavy machinery at remote logging camps throughout Montana's wilderness areas, where I've discovered that some entities view logging operations as territorial intrusions, requiring aggressive response through systematic equipment sabotage. I've been working logging operations for 14 years in Montana's vast forest regions, operating chainsaws, skidders, and logging trucks in areas where equipment failure can create deadly situations involving massive trees, steep terrain, and isolation from emergency medical services. This happened last August while working at the Glacier Creek Logging Camp, a remote operation located about 40 miles northeast of Kalispell in an area of old-growth forest where we were conducting selective timber harvesting under strict environmental guidelines. The logging camp employed 12 operators working with expensive heavy equipment, including feller bunchers, delimbers, forwarders, and logging trucks, worth millions of dollars, and essential for completing contracted timber harvesting within seasonal deadlines. Our camp was positioned in pristine wilderness, where logging activities were carefully regulated to minimize environmental impact, while providing sustainable timber harvest from forests that required active management to prevent wildfire risks. Around 6 a.m. on our third week of operations, we began discovering equipment sabotage that immediately distinguished this logging job from routine timber operations I had worked throughout 14 years of Montana logging experience. Me feller buncher, a $400,000 machine designed to cut and stack trees, showed hydraulic system damage that couldn't result from normal operation, but that required deliberate sabotage using knowledge of heavy equipment vulnerabilities and access to restricted mechanical systems. The sabotage was sophisticated enough to create dangerous equipment failures during logging operations when operator safety depended on properly functioning machinery in environments where tree cutting accidents could be fatal. Around 8 a.m., additional equipment throughout the logging camp showed similar sabotage patterns with damage specifically designed to create safety hazards during active logging operations, rather than simple mechanical breakdowns that would halt work activities. Danny Rivera's delimber had steering system damage that made precise tree handling impossible, creating risks that massive logs could shift unexpectedly and crush operators during normal processing activities. Mike Thompson's forwarder showed brake system sabotage that made transportation of harvested timber dangerous on the steep terrain, typical of Montana logging operations, where equipment operators depend on reliable braking systems for safety. The systematic equipment sabotage created operational paralysis that threatened our ability to complete contracted timber harvest within seasonal windows while creating safety conditions that made continuing logging operations extremely hazardous. Around 10 a.m., while investigating the equipment damage for insurance and safety violation reports, we discovered evidence that the sabotage was being conducted by entities with detailed knowledge of logging operations and access to equipment during periods when human supervision wasn't present. Security cameras positioned around expensive equipment showed no human activity during overnight periods when sabotage occurred. But the cameras did record unexplained interference with surveillance systems during the time windows when equipment damage was being inflicted. The sabotage patterns showed understanding of logging industry safety protocols and equipment operation that suggested the perpetrators had extensive experience with timber harvesting, rather than random knowledge that might be acquired through casual observation. Around noon, the equipment sabotage escalated when entities began targeting operators directly during active logging work, creating safety hazards that went beyond equipment damage into deliberate attempts to cause serious injury during timber operations. While operating my feller buncher to cut a marked Douglas fir, the hydraulic systems failed at the moment of maximum stress during tree cutting, creating an uncontrolled tree fall that nearly crushed my equipment cab and required emergency evacuation from the operator compartment. The timing of the hydraulic failure suggested deliberate coordination with logging activities rather than random mechanical breakdown, indicating that entities were monitoring our operations and timing their sabotage for maximum danger to equipment operators. Around 2 p.m., logging camp supervisor Steve Martinez made the decision to suspend timber operations until we could determine the source of equipment sabotage and implement security measures adequate to protect both expensive machinery and operator safety. But the entities responsible for sabotage weren't deterred by work suspension and continued their campaign against our logging camp through escalating interference with camp facilities and personal equipment used by logging crews. Generator systems providing camp power failed due to fuel contamination. Communication equipment suffered damage that isolated our camp from emergency services, and personal vehicles showed sabotage that prevented evacuation from the remote logging location. Around 4 p.m., we realized that the systematic sabotage campaign was designed not just to halt logging operations, but to trap our crew at the remote camp where we would be vulnerable to continued harassment and potential physical harm from hostile entities. The sabotage demonstrated sophisticated understanding of logging camp logistics and crew psychology, using equipment failures and isolation tactics to create psychological pressure that exceeded normal industrial safety concerns. Around 6 p.m., using emergency procedures and backup communication systems, we managed to contact Rocky Mountain Timber headquarters and coordinate evacuation of our logging crew, despite continued interference from entities opposing our timber operations. During evacuation, we observed direct evidence of the entities responsible for sabotage. Large, dark figures moving through the forest around our camp with obvious intelligence and territorial behavior that confirmed our logging activities had triggered aggressive response from wilderness residents. The entities demonstrated supernatural abilities, including rapid movement through difficult terrain and coordination that suggested organized resistance to logging activities rather than random wildlife behavior or human interference. When we safely evacuated and reported the sabotage incidents, company management revealed similar problems at other Montana logging camps, with patterns of equipment damage and crew harassment that had been attributed to environmental activism or normal equipment failure. Investigation showed that logging operations in certain areas of Montana wilderness consistently experienced higher rates of equipment failure, crew accidents, and operational problems that exceeded industry averages and suggested coordinated opposition to timber activities. I continue working logging operations because timber harvesting provides essential materials for construction and paper industries, while supporting rural Montana communities. but I now avoid camps in areas where entity opposition to logging activities has been documented. Current logging safety protocols include enhanced equipment security, accelerated operational timelines to minimize camp exposure, and evacuation procedures for supernatural interference that goes beyond normal environmental and safety hazards affecting timber operations. Some entities in Montana's wilderness areas view logging operations as territorial violations, requiring aggressive response through equipment sabotage and crew intimidation that can make sustainable timber harvesting impossible, despite legal harvesting permits and environmental compliance. Ants. My name is Wade Snowdrift. I am 45 years old, and I work as an emergency road service coordinator for Montana. Responding to truckers stranded during severe weather events throughout the state's highway system, where I've learned that some blizzard emergencies involve supernatural elements that trap drivers in life, threatening situations beyond normal winter weather hazards. I've been coordinating winter emergency response for 16 years across Montana's extensive highway network, managing rescue operations during blizzards that can dump 3 feet of snow within hours and create whiteout conditions that make highway travel impossible. This happened last January during a severe winter storm that produced blizzard conditions across a 200-mile section of Interstate 94 between Billings and the North Dakota border, trapping dozens of commercial trucks in deadly weather that tested every aspect of emergency response capabilities. The storm developed rapidly with weather conditions deteriorating from normal winter driving to life, threatening blizzard within 2 hours, catching multiple truck drivers in areas where emergency shelter wasn't readily available, and where survival depended on emergency preparedness and quick rescue response. Around 4 p.m., I received emergency calls from 3 commercial truck drivers who reported being trapped by rapidly accumulating snow in an area where Interstate 94 crosses exposed prairie with no natural windbreaks to reduce blizzard intensity. The trapped truckers included veteran drivers with extensive winter driving experience, who had been caught by weather conditions that developed faster than forecast and that created survival situations despite proper equipment and emergency preparedness. Jerry Martinez, driving eastbound with a load of agricultural equipment, reported that his truck had become stuck in snowdrifts that accumulated around his vehicle faster than normal blizzard conditions would produce, suggesting unusual weather patterns or snow accumulation. Linda Chen, hauling freight westbound toward Billings, described snow conditions that seemed to be specifically targeting her truck, while leaving adjacent highway areas with less accumulation, creating localized weather that didn't match normal blizzard patterns. Around 6 p.m., while coordinating emergency response using snowplows and emergency vehicles, we encountered weather phenomena that challenged standard blizzard response procedures and suggested supernatural elements affecting normal winter storm behavior. Weather conditions around the trapped trucks were more severe than measurements from nearby weather stations indicated, with localized temperature drops and wind speeds that exceeded regional storm characteristics, and that seemed concentrated around specific vehicle locations. Most disturbing was that emergency equipment experienced mechanical failures when approaching certain trapped trucks, with snowplows and rescue vehicles suffering engine problems and communication failures that prevented normal emergency response operations. Around 8 p.m., the trapped truckers began reporting phenomena that confirmed their emergency situation involved supernatural elements beyond normal blizzard survival challenges that Montana Emergency Services were equipped to handle. Martinez reported that something large was moving around his truck in the blizzard, creating shapes in the snow and wind patterns that suggested intelligent behavior rather than random weather. Related phenomena affecting his emergency situation. Chen described hearing voices calling for help from other directions in the blizzard, but when she attempted radio contact with other trapped drivers, they reported no distress calls and were located in different areas than the voices suggested. Around 10 p.m., the supernatural elements of the blizzard emergency escalated when entities began directly interfering with survival efforts and emergency rescue operations in ways that increase danger for trapped truckers and rescue personnel. Heating systems in trapped trucks began failing despite adequate fuel supplies, creating hypothermia risks that exceeded normal winter survival challenges, and that suggested deliberate sabotage of emergency equipment during life-threatening conditions. Communication equipment suffered interference that prevented coordination between trapped drivers and emergency services, isolating victims during critical periods when rescue coordination was essential for survival during blizzard conditions. Around midnight, I made the decision to use alternative rescue procedures, including helicopter support, despite dangerous flying conditions, because standard ground rescue was being prevented by supernatural interference with emergency vehicles and communication systems. But even helicopter rescue faced supernatural opposition, with aircraft experiencing navigation problems, engine performance issues, and communication failures that suggested coordinated resistance to emergency rescue operations during the blizzard emergency. The helicopter crew reported observing large figures moving through the blizzard around trapped trucks, with movement patterns that indicated intelligence and coordination, rather than wildlife behavior during severe weather conditions. I continue coordinating winter emergency response because rapid rescue saves lives during Montana's severe winter weather. But I now include supernatural interference protocols in emergency procedures and maintain enhanced equipment for situations involving unexplained weather phenomena. Some entities in Montana can manipulate blizzard conditions to create life-threatening emergencies for highway travelers, while also providing survival assistance that suggests complex relationships between supernatural forces and human winter survival that exceed normal emergency response understanding.